This pressure that Louie put on himself is what made him start to go deep and find out who he was on stage, and this spawns some of the most legendary bits we've ever seen and heard as a comedy audience.
I'm very happy. I'm married, and I love my wife. I love her very much. My wife hates me. She fucking hates me. She hates me so much. The thing that she's usually mad about is simple. She says that I don't listen to her when she's talking. And I don't. But I try every time I try because I love this retarded woman, so I try really hard.
Some of these bits are extremely famous just because Louie said them. They wouldn't be nearly as special if some Joe Schmo from Idaho said them. For a lot of people who go to see comedy shows, they're not just listening to your jokes, they're drawing conclusions about you based on these jokes. It is important for a lot of comedians to have a personality and character unique to themselves because that's what makes you stand out to an audience ultimately. There are a lot of comedians like Steve Martin and Anthony Jeselnik who just do setup punchline joke, and there's really no takeaway from that. But based on the comedians who are becoming popular now, it's hard to believe that most people will be able to continue that sentiment of setup punchline joke with no real message behind it. This journey allowed Louis C.K. to go from a regular comedian to the comedic powerhouse and identity that he is widely known for today. And with that progress on stage being made, Louis went from being a big comedian to a much, much bigger comedian. Louie started getting some major traction around the late 2000s. In 2006, after starting to build a new act upon inspiration from George Carlin, Louis C.K. wrote and starred in the sitcom Lucky Louie. Lucky Louie was a series that premiered on HBO and was videotaped in front of a live studio audience. At the time, this was HBO's first time doing a live taping in front of a studio audience, so Louie was way ahead of the curve on that note. The show featured Pamela Adlon, Kelly Gould, Rick Shapiro, Jim Norton, and many more. Many people describe Lucky Louie as a bluntly realistic look at what family life is like from all angles. I would say that this description is accurate, but that absurdity demonstrated within the show is what made it special to me. My favorite part of Lucky Louie was when Louie's friend Rich, played by Jim Norton, talks about how he's getting married. Check this out.
I'm getting married.
What? When?
Later today.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
Hey. Wait a minute, who are you getting married to?
My mother's friend.
Why?
One of my teeth is rotted. If I marry her, I can use a Medicaid.
What an insanely hilarious moment on the show. It's crazy to think that somebody would pick a life partner or chain themselves down to another person based on the fact that they need benefits, not even because you love them. To some people that may seem like a cruel interpretation of what marriage is, but I think that cruelty and element of rawness really makes the show's comedy stand out, especially for someone like Louie, who in 2006 was on the tail end of his own marriage that would soon end in 2008 when he and his wife Alex decided to get a divorce. To be even more specific, the show is set to depict what the average working class family looks like, and it includes a bunch of topics from sex and racism to friendships and marriage. Things got extremely interesting when the show started to see big numbers though. In August 2006, Lucky Louie got some bad press from a guy named Bill Donahue, who at the time was the president of the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights. He had written a news release about the show where he had lampooned the offensive nature of the show and called it barbaric. Bill didn't stop there though. He made a bulleted list of content from Lucky Louie that the organization found morbid and obscene from the 10 episodes of the show that had been aired at the time. This was one of Louis C.K.'s first big controversies he would encounter in his career. Then in January 2007, Louie was a guest on the Opie and Anthony radio show, which was co-hosted by Jim Norton, who was also an actor on Lucky Louie, and Bill Donahue would become a guest on this particular episode after he called into the show live. Once he was on the phone, Louie immediately held his feet to the fire and challenged his positions that were in his press release. Louie accused him of misrepresenting the show by taking it out of context. I'll show you some of that here.
Because a married couple trying to make sure that their sex life is healthy before moving on to a second child, how can you have a problem with that?
Did I have a problem with that?
Wow. Apparently, according to your press release,
the Reagan defense, I love it.
That's offensive to Catholics.
Bill, is there anybody that ever does the press releases that you might just kind of glance over and go, all right, and then they kind of, do you word everything accurately? Because what Louie is telling you is the truth. I mean, that really did come out.
Yep.
Well, listen, I write all my own stuff, so I can't blame it on somebody else.
Have you watched Lucky Louie?
No, I haven't.
Well, that's odd because you wrote that thing.
So after Louie and Jim Norton confronted him live on the air, he would immediately bend the knee and admit that it actually had never seen an episode of the show, which is insane to me. It's a practice that's become way too common in journalism, where people will write articles on things they've never even seen with their own eyes or heard with their own ears, yet they will proceed to write a disingenuous article anyway that seeks to defame or annihilate the credibility of some artist or creative that crossed some arbitrary line that the writer has in their head. It's a load of crap. Even though Bill Donahue admitted he had never seen the show, the press release would go on to do a lot of damage because the network airing it started to receive pressure from higher-ups about the show and its offensive nature. Even though the show had prepared 8 scripts for a second season, Lucky Louie would go on to be canceled in September 2006. Early into Louie's career as a comedian and director, he was already embroiled in controversy. With his newfound controversy, though, Louie's audience would continue to multiply as more time went on. Then as Louie continued to make leaps and bounds with his stand-up comedy career, he was eventually a part of Opie and Anthony's traveling virus comedy tour that happened in 2007. This was a legendary comedy tour that featured some of the best comedians in the world. Some of them included Patrice O'Neal, Bill Burr, Greg Giraldo, Bobby Kelly, Ralphie May, Tracy Morgan, and so many more. Louie had become extremely cozy with Opie and Anthony from doing stand-up comedy for so many years in New York at all the different comedy clubs in town, and this led to Louie becoming a regular guest on the Opie and Anthony radio show. In 2007, Louie hosted a 3-hour phone-in show on the Opie and Anthony radio show at the request of Opie and Anthony. Within this 3-hour show, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld had called into the show and was interviewed. While on the air, Louie asked him some absurd questions that were incredibly appropriate for a politician to be asked, and by that I mean he asked him if he's a reptilian space alien that likes to eat Mexican babies. To which Donald Rumsfeld, instead of just saying no, like an adult, refused to comment on the question.
Let him answer, are you a lizard?
Here's the short answer. Yeah. I'm in New York City. I walk down the street, people walk up, shake hands, stop me, they want an autograph. He's a lizard. Want to get a photograph with me. Go to eat last night at dinner, and Joyce and I were sitting there in the little Italian restaurant, and a man came up and said he'd like to buy my dinner, and I refused. And it turns out I paid for my dinner. The next thing I know, the waiter comes back and said the man insisted to pay for your dinner, and here's your canceled receipt for paying.
Oh, wow, that's very nice.
There's plenty of people that...
You didn't answer the question.
He's not going to dignify...
I think you're hanging around with the wrong people.
He's not going to dignify an answer to, are you a lizard, Louie?
Why not?
Because he's not a lizard.
What is the story about getting somebody paid for your dinner? I would pay for a lizard's dinner.
I think I understood the fact that there are people out there that appreciate what he's done as a leader. And
there's plenty of evidence that this guy is a well-decorated and appreciated American. And he has more credibility than almost anybody.
Exactly.
But I just want to know if he's a lizard.
This controversial video from the Opie and Anthony radio show went absolutely viral, and it led to Louie gaining a lot of attention on the internet. Despite some hate from the controversy, Louie was mainly gaining supporters who thought this was a ballsy question to ask a politician and who respected the wacky antics he displayed. After this newfound publicity Louie received for hilariously pressing Donald Rumsfeld, he ended 2007 on an incredibly high note when he recorded and released his first hour-long special titled Shameless. This special was recorded at the Henry Fonda Theater located in Los Angeles, California. This special aired on HBO, and then after that it was released on DVD. Most of the time, in pop culture, the critics are out-of-touch morons who wouldn't know good media if it smacked them in the face, but they actually gave Shameless an incredible review. The Guardian highlighted how Rotten Tomatoes gave it a 96% and described it as such. 15 years of hard work and evolution have created an apparently effortless honesty that is fluent and heartfelt. Louis C.K. is the voice of resignation. This is a very observant look at the style of comedy Louis has consistently delivered now for decades. Then, similar to his hero George Carlin, he started working on his next hour of comedy immediately after taping Shameless and releasing it to the public. Then in 2008, Louis C.K. gained even more publicity when he made appearances in 3 new movies which were titled Welcome Home, Roscoe Jenkins, Diminished Capacity, and Role Models. In addition to a few noteworthy movie appearances, come March 2008, Louis would go on to tape another hour-long comedy special that would be titled Chewed Up. This special premiered on the Showtime network on October 4th, 2008, and was nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Writing for a Comedy or Variety Special. The special was absolutely hilarious, and once again, it was critically acclaimed by the media. Louis also dedicated the special in loving memory of George Carlin, who would go on to lose his life from heart failure on June 22nd, 2008, the same year that Louis had taped Chewed Up. All in all, the special was another huge breaking point for Louis, and then more good news for Louis, he got divorced the same year. I'm kidding, obviously, but according to Louis, divorce is always a good thing, so I thought I would, well, you understand. The divorce hit Louis really hard, though. Lucky for him, though, he would share joint custody with his ex-wife and would still get to see his daughters quite frequently. In a time where Louie really started seeing the fruits of his success manifest themselves, this really worried him a lot. In a 2010 interview, Louis C.K. talks about how after the divorce, he was seriously concerned about where his act would go from there, considering the fact that a lot of stories from his marriage were seriously interesting and worth telling on stage. To Louis, all that had come to an end now, and all he could really do was advance and do the same thing with stories from his now divorce. One thing I learned was when Louis was beginning to break through and gain some serious fame and notoriety, he decided to start training at a boxing gym where fighter Mickey Ward trained at. His reason for this was he wanted to be able to endure the grueling and consistent grunt work one has to do when training boxing so that you're in good enough shape to fight and take a beating. He drew a direct parallel to what it's like when you're building a new hour of comedy as a stand-up comedian from the ground up and you've thrown away all of your best tools. As mentioned earlier, Louis C.K. takes writing comedy very seriously and undergoes a long and arduous process to build a tight hour of comedy. He actually shares this method for writing on an interview with Charlie Rose. Check it out.
Yeah, specials are something. It's to me. I used to describe it like the way they make samurai swords, or used to. Yeah. That they bang it and then fold it and then bang it again, and then they fold it and keep banging it. So they pound on it. Right. And they fold it so that they're squeezing out all the oxygen that's in the, you know what I mean? Yeah, just keep making it perfect. So every time you think I've got an hour, no, you don't. Write another hour and then fold it into that one, and then get rid of all the impurities and all the bad stuff, and then keep doing that.
This is a lot harder than just drinking a lot and then screaming into the mic like an idiot until 60 minutes has gone by. Louis treats building an hour of comedy like the art form that it is. The folding of a katana blade to get rid of all the impurities is an incredible visualization for understanding how a comedy album should be. When you write an hour, you're not done, and the real work has actually just begun, finding spots for punchlines, tags, callbacks, anything that will allow you to be killing for the entire hour you're performing as a comedian. When I first learned how Louis C.K. would do this method over and over again, it made me really respect him more as a comedian because of how seriously he takes the craft and how he doesn't want to just coast on his fame and actually produce formidable comedy for his audience. More on his stand-up specials later, but in those moments when Louis was really breaking and building a seriously large fan base, he would start to appear on late night TV much more often. In October 2008, Louis would appear on Late Night with Conan O'Brien and would have an absolutely outstanding performance. One of the clips recorded from his appearance was an iconic Louis C.K. bit titled "Everything is Amazing and Nobody's Happy." And this bit is basically exactly what it sounds like. Louis talks about how the technological advancements that have been made since he was a kid to now, when he's an adult, have been absolutely fantastic. Then he goes on to juxtapose this happiness and thankfulness with how American...
I try like 20 minutes of new jokes, and they all work. Just applause for every joke. I'm like, I'm the king, I'm the best.
A lot of people talk about stand-up comedy nowadays. Even though it's a comedian's job to make people laugh, a lot of comedians find themselves embroiled deep in controversy. This brings us to
Louis C.K.
Louis C.K.
Louis C.K.
Louis C.K.
Who is Louis C.K.? He has certainly had one of the most interesting career arcs out of any celebrity on the planet. Some people call him the greatest stand-up comedian of all time, while some people call him a reprehensible monster who should be locked up forever. Who's right? Why is Louis C.K. such a polarizing figure in show business? At one point in time, Louis C.K. was described as the industry darling who could do no wrong. How did he go from being such a beloved figure to being such a hated figure, seemingly overnight? Aside from the controversy, what makes Louis C.K. such an incredible comedian? Because say what you want about the man, but what you can't say is that his success as an artist didn't come without good reason. By the end of this video, you will know exactly who Louis C.K. is, where he came from, some of the amazing work he's done, his fall from grace and how he moved past it, and what makes his style of comedy so spectacular and unforgettable. This is Louis C.K., the most controversial comedian ever. On September 12, 1967, Louis Alfred Sicily was born in Washington, D.C. His mother was a software engineer named Mary Louise, and his father was an economist named Louis Sicily. His father, Louis, is of Mexican and Hungarian Jewish descent. Louis' paternal grandfather's name was Jesus Sicily Schweiger, and he was originally from Hungary, but had immigrated to Mexico in the 1920s, which is where the name Sicily comes from. His mother, Mary, was a Catholic American who came from Irish descent. Louie also has 3 sisters. His parents met while they were both attending Harvard University located within Boston, Massachusetts. Despite being born in Washington, D.C., when Louie was just a baby, his family decided to move back to Mexico, where his father had earned a degree from the National Autonomous University of Mexico after graduating from Harvard. In the meantime, Louie lived in Mexico until he was 7 years old, until his family moved back to the States to reside in the Boston area, specifically in Framingham, Massachusetts, for about a year. His first language was Spanish, and he did not learn English until moving back to the States initially. Then when Louie was just 10 years old, his parents decided to get a divorce. His mother was overwhelmingly present in his young life after the divorce. Louie states that his father was around, but that he did not see him a lot after the separation. Eventually, his father would remarry a woman who was an Orthodox Jew, and this would lead to his father converting to Orthodox Judaism. With his father out of the picture, Louie was primarily raised by a single mom and influenced by his 3 sisters. His mother would work long hours to provide for Louie and his sisters, and when she would come home, she would often watch TV shows that were highly inappropriate for children, and this would inspire Louie to work on television when he was older. When Louie reached 15 years old, he attended Newton North High School in Boston, where he would go on to graduate in 1985. One of his peers when he graduated was none other than Matt LeBlanc from the famous TV show Friends. After graduating from high school, Louis C.K. got a job working as an auto mechanic to pay the bills, and while he did that, he also worked part-time at a public access TV cable station in Boston. According to Louis, working in public access TV part-time provided him with the tools and technical knowledge that he needed to make TV shows and short films later on in his career. To this day, one of Louis' favorite things to do is to learn. In his time working, he held a few other jobs, such as a cook at a local Boston restaurant and as an attendant at a video store. In 1984, Louis C.K. started his journey as an artist when he directed his first short film titled Trash Day. The film caught some notable people's attention because after the release, the New York University Tisch School of Arts showed interest in him as a filmmaker. However, Louis decided he wanted to pursue a career in stand-up comedy. Ever since Louis was very young, he always wanted to become a stand-up comedian and a writer, and he held on to that dream until he was old enough to get into comedy nightclubs. So in 1985, Louis C.K. decided to try stand-up comedy for the very first time at Stitch's Comedy Club in Boston during an open mic night. At the time, Louis was only 17 years old, so the club didn't even want to let him in initially. Eventually, after telling them he just wanted to try stand-up comedy and that he wasn't going to drink, they decided to let him in to do it. Given the complexity of his last name being Sickely and spelled strangely, he decided to just write down Louis C.K. so the host had an easier time reading his name. He had been given 5 minutes of stage time, but he realized very quickly that he only had about 2 minutes of material. Louis actually tells the story of his first time performing on stage in an interview on the Fresh Air podcast with Terry Gross. Check it out.
Do you remember your first open mic night?
Oh, yeah, I'll never forget that.
Can you tell us about it?
Well, I found out that you could do there was an open mic night at a club in Boston where I started called Stitches. And I was actually like 17, almost 18 years old. And I thought, geez, you can go on stage. They said you do 5 minutes. You just put your name in a hat and you get on stage. You can be anybody. That was so exciting to me. So I went to this club Stitches, which is very grown up. They didn't even want to let me in because I was underage. And they have a drinking, a liquor license. And then I went on stage and I did about 2 minutes because I didn't have enough material. Like I sputtered, my whole throat constricted, and I heard this roaring in my ears. My eyes were watering. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't control myself. I couldn't think straight, and all these adults, like drinking adults, were looking at me like I'm an idiot. And I just walked off stage to kind of confused, like, little applause. And I just felt like a pile of garbage.
As most comedians do, Louis struggled his first time on stage, and it was very traumatizing for him. Most comedians are not on top of the world when they first start out. Unfortunately for Louis, his first experience scared him away from performing comedy for quite a while. Apparently, he was so discouraged, he didn't perform again until 2 years later. One day when Louis was working at the video store, in comes comedian Kevin Meaney, who was shopping at the video store, and Louis recognized him immediately. According to him, at the time, Kevin Meaney was all over the radio, and apparently he was a huge celebrity in the local Boston comedy scene. Louie proceeded to tell him that he had done an open mic night at Stitch's Comedy Club, and so Kevin told him he wanted him to perform on his show at Stitch's, because Kevin Meaney and Steve Sweeney ran a local show where they would bring on all the best comedians in Boston. Louie didn't want to do the show, but Kevin persisted in him doing it anyway because he said it would be interesting to have a comedian on the show who had no idea what he was doing. I'll let Louie tell the rest of the story.
Well, I didn't do it for a little while, and then at the time I was working at a video rental store in Newton, Massachusetts, where I grew up. And Kevin Meaney, who was a very big star in the Boston comedy scene back then, Boston had a very strong local scene. And I knew who Kevin was. I heard him on the radio and stuff. And Kevin was a customer at the store I went to, that I worked at. And I told him that I had done an open mic. And he said, oh, well, you got to come on my show. He had a show that was a huge, him and Steve Sweeney, these two great comics. They had this show where they would, they'd pack the room and put on all the best comics in Boston. And he said, come be on my show. And I said, well, no, I'd need to practice, do more shows to get good enough. And he said, no, I won't let you go on my show unless you go on now. He said, it's interesting because you don't know what you're, like, it's comedy tragedy. He kind of wanted me to go on and bomb. And so I went again into Stitches, and it was a Wednesday night. It was Sweeney Meaney night. It was jam-packed. And I went on, and I think the audience, people's mouths were open. They were shocked at how bad I was. Just shocked. And I got off stage, and Kevin wouldn't look me in the eye, and nobody would. And it was just the most pulverizing humiliation. It was much worse than the first time, because it was a really, the first time was an open mic night. The premise of the show is that most of us don't know what we're doing. But this was a professional comedy show.
Norm Macdonald would think what Kevin did was hilarious, but I can't help but feel bad for young Louie. However, as all great comedians do, Louie just kept on trying and working hard to improve at comedy for the next few years, and he started to achieve some success early on. Even just his third time on stage went a lot better than the first two sets he did, according to him. Here's a story Louie tells about some of his early progression as a comedian.
The first time I went on stage, I did kind of offbeat and weird jokes, just because I thought that you might as well try being more like what makes you laugh. I did really well. My third time on stage, I had really big laughs. And other comedians came up to me and said, hey, you're funny, you got something. And I was so excited that I had a little foot in the door, that this is something I could maybe do. And I thought, it's me being kind of weird the way I am in real life. I like to say things that don't make a whole lot of sense or surprise people a little bit. But then I got seduced by getting big laughs, and then I just started doing. Once you get laughs, you're like, oh, I'll do anything for that feeling. That feels really good. So then you start thinking of just jokes.
So the first time you were on stage and started doing jokes where the comics were coming up to you and saying that was good, you've got something. What were you doing? What is it that you were doing on stage that they had a positive reaction to you?
I was doing more kind of contemplative, weird jokes. I don't think I did things that were self-reflective. I did things that were just like, well, one of the bits was about street signs that I thought they should be punctuated because I got confused by them. Like signs like, no, you turn, drive slow, children, that kind of thing. It was just taking these street signs and reimagining them. And that was an offbeat, funny, silly bit, and it made people laugh, and that's the only one I remember from then now.
Even in his early days as a young comedian, Louie was being observational and using that as his main fuel for his comedy act. Some of Louis C.K.'s comedic influences include George Carlin, Robin Williams, Richard Pryor, Steve Martin, and the famous hypocrite Bill Cosby. As the Boston comedy scene grew, and Louie himself continued to evolve as a stand-up comedian, he gradually obtained more and more opportunities. He built an incredible resume in his early 20s, sharing the stage with comedians like Lenny Clark, Dennis Leary, and he eventually moved up to regular paid gigs hosting at comedy clubs, and this led to Louie receiving the opportunity to open for Jerry Seinfeld very early on in his career. Then in 1989, Louie decided to move to Manhattan to grow more as a comedian and find greater opportunity. This led led to him making his television debut at 24 years old on the shows Evening at the Improv and Star Search. Additionally, Louie shot a short film called Ice Cream, which would then be submitted to the Aspen Short Fest later in 1994. Louis C.K. would then audition for Saturday Night Live in 1993, but he would unfortunately be declined the position as a cast member. Although he was denied, he would eventually work with Robert Smigel as a writer for the TV Funhouse Shorts, which was a segment on Saturday Night Live that showed a cartoon show. This would not be the only writing job Louie would receive, because he would go on to work as a writer on the Conan O'Brien Show from 1993 to 1994. Then, the next year, he would serve a short tenure writing for The Late Show with David Letterman in 1995. Apparently, this was a rough period for Louie, because he stated that if he did not receive the job to write for Conan O'Brien, then he would have quit comedy altogether. Thankfully, Conan hired Louie to write for the show, subsequently keeping Louis C.K.'s comedy career alive. Speaking of rough periods, Louie would also get married in 1995 to Alex Bailey. Then a year later, in the spring of 1996, Louis C.K. would serve as the head writer for The Dana Carvey Show. The full writing team besides Louie consisted of Steve Carell, Stephen Colbert, Robert Smigel, and Charlie Kaufman. Unfortunately, the show was canceled after only airing 7 episodes. Then in 1996, Louie received the opportunity to record a half-hour HBO special, and it was very well received. After this special, Louie proceeded to get more writing work because from 1997 to 1999, he would go on to write for Chris Rock on The Chris Rock Show. Louie really exceeded as a writer for the show, so much so that he would be nominated 3 times for a Primetime Emmy Award for each year he worked on the show, and he would go on to win the award in 1999. This would not be the first time Louie had been nominated either for his writing, because one year while he was working on the Conan O'Brien Show, he was also nominated for an Emmy. The reason he was nominated is because, according to his peers, Louie would write comedy in a very surgical and meticulous manner. He's been quoted as saying that his approach to writing is a deconstruction that it is both painful and frightening. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Louie took a few years to focus on filmmaking. This isn't to say that Louie stopped doing stand-up comedy altogether, just that he was equally passionate about filmmaking and had some projects in mind that he wanted to get to work on. For example, in 1998, Louie wrote and directed an independent black and white film titled Tomorrow Night, which premiered at the Sundance, which marked his feature film directional debut after making several shorter films, which included 6 short films for the sketch show Howie Mandel's Sunny Skies on the Showtime cable network in 1995. Louie would then go on to self-release Tomorrow Night much later on in the year 2014, but in 1999, Louie would also host a PBS show called Shortcuts, which was a show that featured a lot of independently released short films, and some of the films featured were films Louie directed himself. Later that year, he would also host the Filthy Student Talent Show, which is a mock talent show TV special. Then in 2000, Louie was given an acting role in an independent comedy film titled Tuna, with actor and comedian Nick Offerman. The following year, Louie would perform on a stand-up comedy showcase known as Comedy Central Presents. Then in the year 2001, Louie would write and direct the movie Pootie Tang, which was based off a sketch that was featured on The Chris Rock Show, featuring Chris Rock as a supporting role in the movie. The critics absolutely hated Pootie Tang, and it was even rated at half a star. Movie critic Roger Ebert actually called it a literal train wreck. However, the film, despite its negative reviews, was still a cult classic among fans. Louie was actually fired at the end of the filming for the movie, and the movie was completely re-edited by the studio itself. Despite Pootie Tang being a blemish on Louie's resume, because of the grueling ratings it received, he would go on to co-write screenplays for Rock, Down to Earth, which was released in 2001, and I Think I Love My Wife, which was released in 2007. Then in 2001, Louie would proceed to record his first comedy album, which was titled Live in Houston. Then in 2002, he voiced Brendan Small's estranged father, Andrew Small, in the animated sitcom Home Movies. Additionally, Louis C.K. joined the writing team for the sketch comedy show Cedric the Entertainer Presents from 2002 to 2003. Then in August 2005, Louie would star in a half-hour HBO comedy special as a part of the stand-up series One Night Stand. This was an incredibly popular series amongst comedy fans and featured some of the best comedians in the world, such as Bill Burr, Patrice O'Neal, Jerry Seinfeld, and many others. All in all, this was the early career of Louis C.K., and a lot of the work he was doing when he was a young man finding his way through the world as an artist. A lot of comedians take time to develop and start to get more personal on stage within their material. Louis C.K. was no different. In this case, because it took Louie a long time to find his voice on stage. Even in his early career, when he started to find some success, he talks about how he hated his old act and how it made him miserable to keep doing it over and over and over again throughout each different city. He said he did the same act for 15 years, but then something changed. I'll let Louie explain it for you.
I had been going in a circle that didn't take me anywhere. Nobody gave a shit who I was, and I didn't either. I honestly didn't. I used to hear my act and go, this is shit, and I hate it. But I've been doing this for 15 years, and stopping now is like getting out of prison. Like, what do you do after 15 years of stand-up comedy? How do you re-enter the workforce? So I was in a really bad place. I listened to a CD of George talking about comedy and the workshopping it and talking about it seriously. And the thing that blew me away about this fellow was that he just kept putting out specials. Every year there'd be a new George Carlin special, a new George Carlin album. They just kept coming. They asked him, how do you do all this material? And I'm like, eh. And I hear him and he says, well, I just decided every year I'd be working on that year's special. And I'd do the special and then I'd just chuck out the material. And I'd start again with nothing. And I thought, that's crazy. How do you throw away? It took me 15 years to build this shitty hour. If I throw it away, I got nothing. But he gave me the courage to try, and also I was desperate. What the fuck else was I going to do? This idea that you throw everything away and you start over again.
Louie did the same act for so long, and then when he saw George Carlin talking about building a new hour every single year, it really inspired Louie to just throw out his old act and start fresh. This